Hello everyone and welcome to the Mobile IT Community of Interest, our monthly meeting. Thanks very much for joining us today, but before we get started I'd like to review how to use the GoToWebinar system in order to optimize your experience today. Everybody's on default mute settings due to lots of participants on the call. You're encouraged to please forward any questions that come up using the questions tab, and we'll get to those at the end. In these meetings of the community, questions will be read after the presentation, and we will identify who is asking the question in order to foster participation. If you want to remain anonymous, just say so at the end. We're also planning to have some live polls within the presentation with multiple choice questions. Fairly straightforward. I think we've got 5 questions today. Just click on the answers or the choice provided. If you want to minimize the screen, just use the orange arrow button to minimize. You can also move around the webinar interface of the screen. So I will now begin the presentation. I'm Stuart Young. I represent Fiatech in Europe and the Middle East. On behalf of all of us at Fiatech and Comet, I'd like to thank you for joining us all today for the Mobile IT Community of Interest. This is our monthly meeting. I think this is the 7th this year. Today's presenter is Reilly from Bechtel. Christian will talk about the RFID-based solutions that were used by Bechtel to improve the performance of materials management in the natural gas project in Australia at Curtis Island. Before going through today's agenda, I'd like to take a minute to introduce Fiatech. Firstly, and this community of interest to those who are not familiar with Fiatech or the community. Fiatech is a member-based organisation with an objective of accelerating the deployment of technology in the capital projects industry. We have approximately 100 member organisations and partners, including academia and subject matter experts and companies of various quarters. We welcome new members to participate in any of our activities, including this community. Fiatech's goal is to enable business leaders to improve productivity and efficiency for delivery, operation and management of capital projects, or capital assets through innovation, collaboration, creativity and networking. In particular, the collaboration of networking of aspects promoted by Fiatech give practical insight into work processes. And for example, after completing the access control project within Fiatech, Firaz Hijazi from CCC indicated the RFID solution utilised on their project reduced the entry time to construction sites and provided real-time tracking of the site workforce. Such benefits support the adoption of innovative methods and technologies, as well as large cost savings to our members. If you're interested in getting involved, then just drop me a note at the end. So why mobile IT? At the core of Fiatech's interest, we are creating this mobile community of interest. It's in reply to a lot of suggestions from members that mobile technology has clearly enhanced project performance. But it's believed that it's only just scratched the surface. There's still many opportunities for the industry to increase productivity through improved project information flow. And as we've mentioned before, in Fiatech we strive to solve practical problems and the challenges associated to implementing mobile technologies that are of a practical nature. We as a community hope to realise these potentials, and with your help we can make a real difference to this industry and increase productivity. The objective of the community is to bring together project stakeholders, their ideas to improve efficiency in the field using mobile IT, and share that knowledge to implement these ideas throughout the industry. The community is a joint effort between Fiatech and Comet. Comet is a UK-based organisation whose principal aim is to learn from experience and deliver measurable business benefit in terms of adoption of mobile technologies. Participants in this community will get together in 2 ways. Firstly, through these monthly meetings, where all participants come together to learn about specific applications and technology. And second, participants get together through subgroup meetings which focus on specific topics of interest to the community and in which participants may carry out work inside their own organisations. to advance the knowledge on implementation of mobile systems. The deliverables from the community developed by the subgroups would include reports, pilot tests or use cases of the work carried out. These could give an insight into the benefits, challenges and costs involved in the use of the new technologies and applications. Furthermore, work inside the community can become Fiatech-wide projects through formal project proposals. This would increase the scale of a given project and involve all Fiatech membership. Today's agenda. We'll first have announcements, or we'll have announcements regarding the future steps for the subgroups. We've made a couple of adjustments on that. And we have got Christian's presentation, which follows my introduction. We've got questions and answers at the end, but we've got polls during the session. And again, I think there's 5 questions we've got to run through with you and get some choices from you. Also on this session, we've got Jeff Braun from Atlas RFID, who was instrumental in the project. He was indeed the project manager responsible for the implementation of the system at Curtis Island. As I mentioned before, your questions will be read during this section with your name if you wish, hopefully to foster participation in the community. Again, after the presentation, we will make final announcements for the community. So just mentioning there about the subgroups, among the industry experts that support this community, we've recently discussed some potential adjustments to the subgroups format. Accordingly, we've observed and learned some aspects that need to be brought up to date. We've had 2 subgroup meetings that basically focused on mobile software, and what we believe we need to do now is merge the subgroups into a single subgroup that has an objective of enabling participants to share and communicate all the challenges that affect their decisions to develop mobile tools and strategies. In this way, it will be possible for participants to propose and join projects that are focused on a specific aspect of mobility, such as the use of BIM data or RFID documents, but now enabling a perspective that considers a larger set of variables involved in mobile implementation. As such, the invitation for the next meeting will be sent out to all of you who have expressed interest in participating within the subgroups, and that will occur on the 25th of July, 9 AM US Central Time. Please let us know your thoughts, questions or comments as we move forward with our community. Now we'll move on to the topic for today, the main presentation. As I mentioned before, we have Christian Reilly from Bechtel as our main speaker. Christian, his role in Bechtel is a manager of EPC systems. He is based in London. He's responsible for strategic planning, operational oversight and financial management of the central applications and systems portfolio that spans the core engineering, procurement and construction and ancillary functions within Bechtel. The EPC systems team aligns key business processes with a technology-focused approach to provide comprehensive solutions supporting project execution. Christian joined Bechtel in '96 and has held project IT manager positions on several large projects across multiple business units. Among other functions, his work has included overall responsibility for the design and implementation of Bechtel's project services network, widely recognized in the industry, in the technology industry, to be the first true private cloud environment. So, Christian, I'll now pass it over to you.
Okay, thank you, Stuart, and thanks everybody for joining. Appreciate you guys giving up the time today to listen to our story around RFID. I'm going to make an assumption that a lot of you guys know who Bechtel is, so I won't spend too much time on the introduction to the company. But just to kind of let you guys know that Bechtel is the #1 choice for engineering, construction and project management around the world. ENR has recently recognized Bechtel as the top US contractor again, and that's the 15th straight year that we've held that accolade, which is obviously something we're very proud of. So as we go through the discussion today, just wanted to thank a couple of my colleagues. I don't know whether they're on the call or not, but a couple of guys who are really instrumental in doing this. Ed Cook, who's out in the construction automation group in the US, and John Platt, who's the procurement automation manager, who's also based in rested in the US. Obviously, this is kind of a multi-party effort, as you'll see as we go through it, so it would be wrong of me not to recognise the guys who really did the work. So we'll just kind of go through this a little bit sort of relatively quickly, just to kind of give you guys an idea of this. I'm expecting that there'll be a number of questions as we go through, and I'll be happy to answer those, as Stuart said at the end. Stuart, I think you might need to give me the controls if you haven't done so already.
Yeah, that's with you now.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so as Stuart mentioned, we're going to talk specifically about the use case today, which was the Curtis Island LNG projects that are in Australia, on the east coast of Australia. There's actually 3 mega LNG projects on at one time, which is on the Curtis Island location. The area that you see on the screen there is the kind of the top end of Curtis Island. Just to kind of give you an idea of where that is, it's about a 3-hour drive north of Brisbane in Queensland. And the total size of the project site is about 20 square kilometres or roughly 8 square miles. So the total, just to give you kind of a reference on that, the Disney World site is about 40 square miles, but only in this particular case in Curtis Island, about 16 square miles is developed. So that means that our project site is about one half roughly the size of Disney World. So as I mentioned, we got 3 major LNG projects on here, and each of the projects individually has a TIC that's well in excess of multiple billions of dollars. And the kind of the unique thing about this is that even though there were 3 distinct projects on at one go, there are actually 3 distinct clients and owners. So, you know, you kind of put the complexities there. We've got obviously a location that's very difficult to get to. We've got a workforce that we have to bring in and out every day. And then we've got a whole materials question that we'll talk about. I just want to kind of give you some background on where the locations actually are as we kind of look at the physical map that we've got here. Stuart, I think you might have to give it to me again, Woody, if you don't mind.
How's that?
Not quite.
Okay, let's try again. I can advance at my end if you just give me the nod.
Yeah, why don't you go ahead and do that? So it's probably easier just to give it a click now. Okay, so just to give you an idea of some of the locations, the pipe fabrication facility that we had was actually in Turkey, which, as you guys probably are aware, is in Eastern Europe. Another click, Stuart, please. So this is the site of Project A, the first LNG site. The storage associated with that, which obviously is a laydown area, is in the 2 green circles that you can see down towards the bottom right. And next click, Stu, please. So you'll see the project site B is up towards the kind of the top of the picture. The storage area for that. Click again, Stuart, please. Okay, it's actually down further to the right, as you'll see there. And then couple more clicks, please, Stuart, to show us location C and the storage for C. Couple more, and so this will kind of complete the picture, which includes the central receiving and storage and the port facilities. So you can imagine here we've got a lot of things going on at one time here, not only trying to figure out how we get the equipment from the laydown areas up to the sites themselves, but trying to deal with the logistics of the ferries and barges and shipping operations that take the materials from A to B or A to C or C to B. It is kind of quite the difficult challenge. And so the main purpose of kind of showing you this and showing you the kind of difficulty of this is that really when we start talking about, you know, technology needing to be applied to solve a real business problem, I dread to think what might have happened if we'd had to do this manually. You can imagine that these are lump sum projects, so schedule is kind of very important in that. Getting things between these locations from a manual perspective would have given us significant lag in time and so on and so forth, and probably cost as well. So the kind of the goals in this really were to sort of maintain the location of materials as they move through the kind of localized supply chain that you see there, and then also to shorten the cycle time and to reduce the cost for the collection and transfer of materials by using fewer resources. So obviously the less manual labor we have in that and the better automation, kind of the better for all concerned. So the kind of the takeaway of this key sort of slide here, just for the scene setter, is that any technology project that we've kind of approached in Bechtel in the last few years has been successful when there's been a real business challenge. And I know that sounds like an obvious thing to say, but the point I would make is that, as we see in the industry, lots more technology being made available. I think that the challenge of finding the right technology, marrying it to a business problem and having it be successful is going to become more pronounced, because there's going to be much more opportunities for technology to leak into the environment which doesn't quite hit the mark. So just kind of bear that in mind as we go through. And next slide, please, Stu.
Yeah, we're into the questions. So bear with me 1 second. Okay. So question number 1. What is the purpose of incorporating mobile technology into your materials management execution strategy? %, voted. 63, 75. Just a couple more seconds. We're at 92, 96. Okay, any more? No, okay. Close that one. I will share that. Can everybody see that? Okay. Okay, Christian, back to you.
Okay, thanks, Stuart. So I should give you a little bit. Okay, thank you, Stuart. So I'll just give you a little bit more background about kind of the number of teams involved and where these guys are. The difficulty, of course, with distributed teams is that you can't very easily get everybody together on the same page. So if you just click through, Stuart, I'll give you some ideas of how this kind of all hangs together. And the really important bit of this is to kind of learn from our experiences of how important it is to make sure that you get to the right people in terms of trying to figure out exactly what the business problem is you're trying to solve, and then marrying the technology to it. So the business unit procurement guys were based in Houston in Texas. Just click through, Stuart, please. So that's coupled with the corporate construction and procurement guys who are actually based in Reston in Virginia. And sort of together, that initial team had looked at sort of previous RFID initiatives within the industry, and pretty much concluded that for this to be successful, it has to be, obviously scalable, reliable, and then moreover, it has to be configurable into kind of the company's existing business processes and the supply chains that we have. So even though RFID was available and had matured and become cost competitive, it really hadn't been proven on a large-scale construction project. So we'd actually previously piloted the technology on a couple of other occasions back in 2008, where we did about 20,000 active tags. And so, it's kind of interesting that it took us from 2008 to sort of 2010, 2011 to sort of retry this. And I think we picked a very good partner with Atlas and the Jovic system, those guys are based in Alabama. And then one more click, Stuart, please. You'll find, obviously, back to where we started, that the joint execution team is in Australia. So just to kind of obviously paint the picture of the fact that this is a global effort, not only do you have to deal with obviously the geographical locations, but you've kind of got the time zone challenges as well as we sort of go through this. The interesting thing that I would mention about the joint execution team, which again, just from a backdrop perspective, has kind of made this a little bit easier. One of the strategic exercises that we undertook on Curtis Island was that even though we have got very distinct clients, and as you saw from the Google Earth image, the locations are sort of quite different on Curtis Island. The idea was to set up the joint execution team so that we could actually streamline certain key activities, procurement being one of those, of course, that would supply across all 3 projects. So rather than have distinct EPC teams on each one, we kind of took the P out of the EPC and made that a joint effort across the 3 projects, such that we could build in some of the economies of scale towards that. So again, just to kind of make the point that it's not solely a technology discussion. The whole purpose of applying the technology to this was predicated upon some business decisions that were made to try and streamline what would be the overall procurement activity to the Curtis Island location. So next slide, please, Stuart.
Okay, we're into our next question. I'll pose that question now. Have you introduced any mobile technology into your materials management execution strategy? Okay, thanks everybody for voting on that one. I'll close that one now. I will share the results. Can everybody see those? Okay, I'll then move on to the next slide. Back to you, Christian.
Thanks. Interestingly enough, that the 29% there on the pilot and trial basis, that doesn't come as a great surprise to me, just for a number of reasons. So
no.
Interesting to see that. Okay, Stuart, I'm just waiting for the refresh of the webinar here.
Okay. I'm on slide 15 at the moment, Christian.
Yeah, it just doesn't seem to have refreshed off the poll, Stuart, for me, but I can...
Oh, wait a minute. Right, how's that?
Okay, that's great.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks. So yeah, just talk a little bit about the components here. We've talked about obviously the challenge that we had, the locations and the teams that were involved. So obviously working with our partners there at the Atlas RFID, we built up the system that would ultimately provide the RFID tracking capability for Curtis. So you want to just click through those, Stuart, and I'll kind of add in the blanks as you go through it. So far to date, we have 37 mobile demand tablets that are located and dispersed to all project locations on the mainland that you saw there, Curtis Island, of course, and at the spool fabrication location in Turkey. We have about 60,000 active RFID tags, which of course are reprogrammable tags if you're familiar with RFID. Applied to various material types. These include obviously steel bundles and pipe spools and the things that you would typically see tagged items wise that would go into a LNG facility such as the ones that we're building there. At the moment there's about 100,000 individual components that have been managed to date, and that's largely because of the reprogrammable nature of the tags. Once they're installed, we can actually reuse them for other purposes. There's a kind of an interesting twist on that, which talks about maybe with the extension of RFID life in the future, that we could actually afford to leave the tags in place and they become part of a slightly more advanced operations and maintenance construct. So we're kind of thinking about a little bit about that in the future, but typically at the moment the operating or the expected operating life of the final facility obviously by far and away exceeds the life of the current RFID capabilities. So just kind of something to think about there for future. So we have 13 gate readers which are installed at the entry and exit of all the facilities, including the lay-down yards that you saw on there, the spool fabricator, the port facilities, and the locations that enable kind of the cross-harbour movement. There's 4 vehicle-mounted readers that are used at different locations, and there's the main reason for those, of course, is to kind of just help us calibrate any movement in locations, because even though these things are set down and actually tagged to a given location, if you've ever been on a project site, you'll know it's organised chaos and things tend to grow legs and move on their own. So we have the vehicle-mounted readers that help us to sort of recalibrate where things are. And then, of course, kind of the software that holds it all together is the Jovix application from Atlas RFID. That was originally implemented in our US data center in Bechtel, but then we transitioned it to the site to make sure that there was better performance for the guys that were out there using it on a daily basis. So essentially, all those components kind of go together to support the revised work process. And one of the things that I would like to sort of make sure everybody understands here is that when you start to implement the technology and you've got all the right people that you heard about earlier in the conversation in the mix and kind of bought into the ultimate goal, what you begin to find is that there are kind of rapid iterations in a similar way that you would talk about agile software development. You know, the iterative work process iterations is kind of really interesting. And so, you know, the way that you end up thinking about the work process is probably not the way that you end up at the start. So very interesting that we see, you know, once everybody's bought into a particular solution, they start asking, you know, more questions about what if, and that's kind of an ideal place that you want to be from an IT provider to a project or to large construction projects. You really want to be in that position where you've got the pull from the business rather than, you know, kind of IT coming up with things in the middle and hoping that they, you know, find a fertile soil by firing something out that we think should be used. So just to kind of give you some stats on sort of where we are, the information that we have in the Jovix system today tells us that we've got about 6.3 million tag reads, which is, of course, is a big number in and of itself. But we shouldn't think about that just as a, you know, the reading of a tag, but really the movement of material. So the tag reads and the material movements are obviously not the same number. But rather than just think about tag reads, we really have to think about the impact on that from a material movement perspective. So currently there's about 1.2 million tag movements, which reflects the movement of material that we've had in and out of the locations that you saw. And, you know, pretty much without that, all of those movements would have needed to be manually entered into, you know, the existing material management systems, up to and including having to transcribe from paper forms that are carried around by people in the kind of usual lock boxes that go out with field engineers. And then the biggest sort of challenge with that, of course, as I mentioned at the start about the schedule imperative, was that we would have had significant amounts of what we call information latency. So, you know, the time taken to complete a form and submit that to whichever system is significantly different than when you do it with automation. So obviously the key message on that is to shorten the cycle times for information, which obviously has a downstream and network effect on the rest of the overall process. Okay, and the next slide, please, Stuart. Okay, so I'll tell you a little bit about some of the kind of the way that we approach this with Atlas, and you know, I've talked about this a lot in just various philosophies in kind of the vendor engagements that I do with other vendors as part of my overall role in Bechtel. But I think that the norm now for kind of enterprises such as Bechtel going forward will be to ensure that we partner with new and emerging vendors that are capable of being agile and responsive to meet new challenges. I think, you know, without saying too much good about the Atlas RFID and Jovix guys, you know, the relationship and the partnership that we've established there is kind of, to me, the poster child of how enterprises who are looking for innovative solutions that bring results and also bring those results with speed. I think, to me, that's kind of the new model going forward. And we're already seeing examples of that with other much larger vendors who are now becoming a little bit more flexible than the traditional mechanisms. And I think a lot of that bleeds from what we've seen in consumer technology finding its way into enterprise. And so, you know, I think that's an excellent example of how this might play out. And we're talking here, of course, about just several very short months for us to, you know, develop the additional software and integration into our existing material management system, which is the Bechtel procurement system, which is not a very imaginary titled application, but it's a big suite of software that does the whole of Bechtel's procurement, material management, T&L, and so forth. So kind of the story here is that being able to bring a partner in, being able to work within the confines of an enterprise application to deliver something innovative, to me, is kind of the model going forward. It's highly unlikely that any EPCs will en masse throw away everything that they've had for numbers of years to kind of deal with a brand new area of mobility. So I think striking up that partnership where you kind of build a bridge between the new enabling technologies and the existing data sources, I think is going to be key to everybody as we go forward. And so on the next slide, please, Stuart. So just to kind of codify that a little bit more, to give you some examples of the lessons learned here, we began gathering the requirements in, I guess it was November of 2011, and then within 6 months we had the initial solution available for testing, which included those integrations that I talked about, and we began the first field deployments to the projects on Curtis Island in June of 2012. So if you remember what I said a little bit earlier, one of the things that we did, and we've done this in other areas as well, as we've kind of learned over the last 2 or 3 years about our mobility environment in Bechtel in general, is that we've had a tendency to try and define field-based work processes in the home office. And while ever that sounds like a safe bet, because you would expect that there's a number of people in the home offices with significant experience and so on, you actually find that what the guys in the field want and what the people in the home office think are actually two very different things. And so we learned an interesting lesson there about the fact that the initial deployment sort of failed, and it failed primarily because we were defining a field process from the home office, but it kind of, there's a philosophy out there that it's okay to fail as long as you learn from the failure and you fail fast and fail forward, and I think that's kind of exactly what we did. We kind of realized that perhaps taking a more iterative view, more small steps and solving small problems linked directly to what the field guys are actually asking for would have put us in the right direction, kind of a lot quicker and sort of lowered the overall barriers to entry. So that's why we've kind of come up with this nickname of proof of reality, because we designed and defined all this in a home office environment, and then took it to the field. And that field trial, as it would have been normally, kind of ended up being a proof of reality because the people that were going to be the ultimate benefactors of this were not really included in the design process. So again, just a kind of a little bit of a lessons learned as we go through this, that obviously making sure, and we've nicknamed it in Bechtel, talk to the welder, in quote marks, just to make sure that any design or work process iteration that you do is actually directly linked to the guys that are going to use this thing. And then so finally, I think the other thing was we probably didn't have a full commitment to leveraging an external vendor. It was certainly initially. It's one of those things that we kind of thought that we would be able to do ourselves initially, and then obviously we talked a lot about the fact that if you really want to make a paradigm shift, just throwing technology at it, no matter how good the technology is only a relatively small percentage of the overall challenge, and that challenge includes needing senior management buy-in, it includes needing sponsorship, and it includes needing, above all, in my opinion, the linkage to the guys who are actually going to do the work. So and back to the point that Stuart made at the start, so we brought the JSC, as it was called, the Job Site Systems Coordinator. That was going to be the boots on the ground guy from the vendor, so obviously in this case the Atlas guys putting skin in the game on Curtis Island to make sure that we have a sort of a single source of truth on the vendor side to help us with the success of the overall solution. Okay, the next slide please, Stuart. Okay, so just to kind of, again, make a little bit of a point about what we tried to do here. So this, in my opinion, to kind of move the paradigm would have been difficult for us to do on any large given project, but to do it on 3 major projects simultaneously, I would suggest that that's a significant paradigm shift in the kind of the way that we were doing the material management. So as we went through it, we kind of had many objectives to obviously make this repeatable and reusable across other projects, not just in Australia, but all across the world. But kind of just to go through the 3 key things here. So we really needed to understand the TU, or the transfer unit movements through the entire supply chain to make sure that we were kind of optimizing their usage. You don't want to lose track of where these things are when you've got the challenges that we talked about relative to only being able to ship at certain times of the day or night. And we had about 600 of the flatbed TUs that you see on there being used for material movement, and they had to be accounted for pretty much at all times. And again, think about what we talked about before. If that was done manually, then of course we'd be in that information lag context again. On the next clip, Stuart, please. So we wanted to reduce the material availability issues from material not being immediately located. So, you know, when I sort of look at construction productivity challenges that we have, obviously people will say that it's the lack of information or the lack of the right or timely information to construction that causes the problems. And I take that as a given, but then you begin to break it apart and say, well, what does that really mean? Does it mean, you know, the fact that we haven't mobilized crew, or the fact that we've got hard or soft clashes, or is it the fact that, you know, from a material withdrawal perspective, we just can't find what people are asking for? And so when we talk about the material availability issues, that's exactly what we're talking about. So, you know, we've mobilized the crew to fit pipe, and yet, you know, from a materials requisition perspective, we've got lag in that, because even though the withdrawal request has been made, we don't actually know or can't find the material. And then again, when you kind of add that into the context that you saw on Curtis Island, where there's only certain times of the day that the barges can operate, then the last thing you want to be doing is looking for material and missing shipping times while you've got a mobilized crew. And then on the next one, please, Stuart. And so obviously the final one, as I've talked about before, is to reduce the kind of the status quo, or the reliance on the manual paper-based processes, because these just really add to indirect and direct man hours and contribute significantly to the delays that we talked about in the overall material provisioning. So, you know, if you were going to take one thing away from this discussion today, it's really about, you know, lasering in on several things that you really want to focus on, to make sure that the technology is a fit and can add the value. Obviously, there's a separate discussion that goes on about, you know, how much time do you save and what's the ROI, which of course is a whole separate discussion. But just being able to focus on some things that are achievable and things that will be considered a success, again, you know, link back to the people who are going to use it, link back to the business problem itself, and, you know, trying to just blanket technology to fix, you know, the world's problems and the kind of boil the ocean approach is probably the wrong way around. So again, just to kind of give you the benefit of the experience here, even though we were talking about a significant paradigm shift, we were very clear on where that paradigm shift needed to be to bring the value for the project. Okay, and on the next slide, please. Okay, so I guess everybody that's ever been on a job site has seen this same guy, you know, the hard hat and the pencil. So this guy is a member of the material management organization, and he's kind of manually updating the receiving logs to reflect the items, in this case structural steel, that's being delivered. As I mentioned about before about the information lag, or kind of the challenges with that, the typical total time, sort of elapsed time, if you will, to receive all the steel was estimated at around about 45 days on this particular project. So on the next slide, please, Stuart. So we'll just kind of move forward a little bit from the manual process that you saw there to a little bit more about the kind of automated side. So what you'll see as the slides go there, if you just do 3 clicks, please, Stuart, you'll see on the left-hand side there, there's an example of a similar craft guy who's out there in the field, but this time he's using the receiving tablet that we talked about. And then obviously adding the RFID to that on the right-hand side, you'll kind of see what happens to the receiving process from, you know, kind of the manual collection and the entry of the post collection data to the automated method using kind of the tablets and the RFID tags. So you'll kind of see there that you know, obviously we get a lot more information a lot quicker. Remember the 45-day thing I talked about there. So typically what we found is that the overall impact on the steel receiving process itself reduced the time of completing the structural steel receipt from the 45 days on the previous side, start to finish, to around about an average of 22. So you can see that that's a significant saving on time on the information lag. And kind of going back to the 3 pillars of the paradigm shift, we were able to prove this by obviously collecting the data and then running the reports on that, figuring out that we could essentially halve that overall steel receipt from the 45 days to the 22. So, and the next slide, Stuart, I believe is another poll question.
It is. Just bear with me a second. I'll bring that one up. Okay, from truck arrival to inventory report receipt, how many days would it take your crew to receive 12,000 plus piece marks of steel? Okay, poll in progress. 71% voted. Any more? Any takers? 75. Okay, all done. I'll close it out at that one. I will share that. Can you see that? Okay, thank you for that.
It tells me we've got no steel fitting foreman on the call.
Brilliant. Okay, next slide. Has that jumped? Has that jumped ahead?
Yeah, that's perfect as it is there, Stuart. So just to kind of again give you kind of a visual of what this looks like. So on the left-hand side there, you can obviously see the blue RFID tags attached on the left-hand side there. You can see in the centre there are the tablet-based readers that we talked about, and on the right-hand side there are the vehicle-mounted readers. So if you just go another click, Stuart, please, and then you'll get a view of kind of like what the tablet application itself looks like. So the kind of the story behind this, and you can kind of see exactly what that looks like. It'll tell you pretty much where the tag is and what its read is at the bottom there. You'll see which RFID tag it is itself. Above that, the material ID, the status, the tag number, and the quantity. That's kind of the part that's integrated into our material management system itself. So would make the point here as well that we've kind of not changed too much on the back end of our existing material management system, which is obviously a good thing, because not having to customize our own system to enable this has been a significant success as well, of course. So overall, if you kind of think about the sort of the value of this, the average times that we talked about required to sort of locate and pick materials using a combination of the tablet and the RFID tags that you saw in the background was reduced significantly over the project life cycle. Searching for the individual pipe spools or cable reels or bundles of steel has been reduced, and this was a quote from one of the field guys, from days to minutes. And so, obviously with the kind of the inventory for 3 of the huge projects that you saw there spread across all those laydown areas that you saw, you can imagine that the locations that we're talking about tend to be relatively dynamic. But using the RFID tags that you saw on the left of the image, and then the vehicle-mounted readers that you saw on the right of the image, as we talked about earlier, that helps us to sort of recapture and recalibrate any new locations, which is kind of automatically reported back to the overall system, so that if anything has moved from A to B, and we do set tolerances around that, obviously, because certain things could move just a couple of meters or whatever. So there's a tolerance set on that for anything that suggests a significant movement. So reported back to the material management teams, which kind of allows us to plan the execution in order to meet the construction team's demands. So the good news about this, of course, is that when things do tend to sort of move around on the laydown yards as they do, the materials tracking on the right-hand side that you saw from the mounted readers was kind of helping us to recalibrate the actual locations of those. So again, we don't waste time on sort of rework and looking for things that we think are in one location but are actually in another. And on the next slide, please, Stuart.
Okay.
Okay, so the MWR process that I talked about, material withdrawal, that's obviously a field-based construction process for requesting material to be withdrawn from the laydown yard and obviously moved to the installation location. So this has been a kind of a manually driven paper process, which kind of requires a whole load of sort of manual intervention. With the implementation of this system, we've actually pretty much eliminated all of the paper-based work process and replaced that with the tablets. And so, you go back to remembering that 1.2 million tag movements we talked about, then obviously we're dealing with 1.2 million less pieces of paper that have been used to do that. So in the photo there on the right, you see inventory specialist who is kind of this, I mean, this is ultimately the end user of this and the reason why we do it. And so, you know, the lady on the right there and the teams that she was part of, they don't have to enter any manual data about picking the progress, and you know, she could use the information coming directly from Jovic to sort of plan and execute the work for the daily basis. And so, you know, one of the major things that were, or processes that were improved here, was the kind of the overall pipe spool picking process. And so, just if you're not familiar with that, you know, pipe spools get cleaned and loaded onto trailers and delivered to the island that you saw. Before we put this in, you know, the laydown crews would take the paper pick list into the field. You know, they'd hand transcribe any spool that was flagged and turn that list over for, you know, data entry at the end of the day. And then that administrator would enter which spools had been flagged, and then so on and so on, and we repeat the process. And you know, this kind of goes on and on. It's a manual data collection entry effort. And then, you know, once the spools are clean, the preservation team writes down which spools were cleaned, and then there's another manual process which takes 2 people just to, you know, decide which spools need to be picked, in which order, who was going to do it, how they were going to do it. You know, this whole concept of it takes a village, and literally it does, you know, if you do it in a paper-based way. You know, and the problem with that is that the manual process sort of takes such a time to complete that it really leaves you very little time to actually plan how to execute the movements of the material. But then when you switch to kind of like the system that we've discussed today, using the vehicle-mounted reader and the RFID tags, the laydown yard team was very quickly able to iterate the work process that kind of automatically captured the steps required in the process by using GPS location or scanning a barcode that was actually attached to you know, update the back-end system that you can see behind there, an extract of, which talks about, you know, where was it in the process, has it been flagged, was it in preservation, you know, had it been cleaned, was preservation complete, has it been dispatched, and that information is kind of captured automatically, of course, and then sent back to the main system a few times a day without needing sort of a paper-based or a secondary system to deal with that. And then the good thing about that, of course, is it gives us the capability to report a lot more accurately and a lot more timely. And then, you know, the clerks that kind of work that system can take care of their overall responsibilities, you know, really accurately in terms of trying to understand and program what spools they have to pick. So, kind of use an example of the pipe spool, because obviously on LNG projects like this, there's significant amounts of pipe that are requested, obviously fabricated, shipped, requested and installed, but obviously there's very little we can do in terms of the physical shipping. We can't really ship any faster from Turkey to Australia, unfortunately, but we can, from the port of entry, as it were, we can obviously deal with that end-to-end process from when it's received at the laydown yard to when it's requested and ultimately installed. We've significantly reduced the time to do that. So again, just trying to make the point here that it's really not focused purely about spool, but with spool being such a major part of the installation of any LNG facility. Again, I wanted to give you guys an example of one of the large items that we've dealt with in terms of the overall process. And so I believe there's another question, Stuart.
There is. What would be the main obstacle you would foresee facing implementation of mobile technology into the materials management strategy? Okay, brilliant. Thank you for doing that. I'll just, oh, we've still got a couple coming in. I'll just close that up and share. Everybody see that? Interesting about craft adoption. That would have been a problem in the past, but maybe not now. Yeah. Okay. advance to the next slide? Do you want me to bring all of these animations up, Christian?
I was on mute. And so, yeah, sure.
Sorry.
Yeah, so I just want to kind of go back and just take a slightly different example here, specific to the TUs that we talked about. So remember there was those 600 flatbed trailers and that we talked about, which were kind of key to the overall movement exercise in terms of transporting the materials to and from the mainland. You know, so with implementing the system here, obviously we had the ability to track the TUs using the RFID. You can see there the gate reader, the vehicle-mounted reader itself, and the GPS. So again, without the solution, you know, all this kind of management of these very, very key components, so that the TUs are very key components of the overall materials management transfer process. So without an RFID-based solution, you know, we'd have to employ more people, more clerks, to kind of figure out exactly where these things are or where the TUs were. So, you know, you imagine that from the point of view of what may happen there, and I tried to put an ES&H or a safety slant on this and said, well, you know, if you really think about that, how is the best way to find out where somebody is if you can't, you know, kind of track them using an RFID or some other kind of tracking solution? And the answer is you call them, right? So now you've got another situation where, you know, do you want the guy with the phone in the transfer unit cab where you need to call him and say, hey, you know, Bob, where are you? I need to figure out, you know, when you're going to be at this point or that point. And so, you know, just from a kind of a conceptually on the safety side, you know, that's not something that we would ever want to promote inside of Bechtel. So, you know, having something that can take place of that where there's no requirement for the driver to be distracted is obviously a massive safety plus as well. So obviously now integrating all of that into the Atlas RFID Jovic system kind of allowed us to provide a real-time snapshot from kind of a fleet management perspective of where the TUs are anytime, anywhere on the project. And then we could also produce regular reports, you know, sort of showing where the TUs had been, where they'd come from, you know, which project site it was on, how long they'd been there, you know, was it loaded, was it not? And so, you know, kind of I'll get a little bit future thinking again. Once we've got all that data, you know, you can start to be a little bit more clever about how you do sort of planning and also even probabilistic models. We talked about using that kind of the big data construct. Once you've got the data, it's so much easier to sort of run the analysis and run algorithms on it to figure out, you know, is there a better way for us to deal with the movements of these things? You know, is there an algorithm that we can use that will give us an idea, you know, what's the best number of vehicles to be in any one location, given, you know, the information that we had out of Jovic plus other information, and that can be anything related to, you know, sort of weather or the number of hours that the driver had operated, a bunch of other things that we thought about in terms of models. So again, you know, just kind of make the point here that if you have this in paper, it's very, very difficult to interrogate or make use of the data because it's locked on a paper format, even if it's in PDF, you know, scanned into some kind of enterprise document management system. There's really no value in that other than to keep historical records. So obviously having the data does open up a lot more opportunities other than just kind of like the live tracking that we talked about. So again, you know, if you remember those 1.2 million tag movements that we talked about, this kind of the 4 things that you see on here is exactly how we knew about them at any one time. So, you know, it's a little bit difficult to actually quantify the overall savings on this, you know, because it's very, very difficult to say, well, you know, this is the unit rate that I put on any one truck at any one time. But, you know, we just instinctively know that you know, the time that we save in finding kind of misplaced items, you know, is a good thing, especially when we've eliminated the possibility of misplacing them in the first place. So, yeah, I think there's a good story in that itself. So on the last, I think there's the last poll question, Stuart.
There is. Let me bring that up. What do you think needs to be involved in making a cultural change like this? Okay, thanks for voting on that one. Couple of seconds more. Okay, thank you. Everybody got those? We will share the results of these polls afterwards, if I didn't mention that at the beginning. Okay, back to you, Christian.
Okay, thanks, Stuart. So yeah, it was interesting to see. I think it was 76% there say all of the above, and I'm glad about that. I was a little bit disappointed to see the 0% for the IT guy, but I think I'll get over that. You know, so I think it's exactly right. You know, anything that you kind of take on at this scale and this size, which does have an operational risk element with it as well to an extent. I think the exact right approach and the one that we took around the sort of the change management was the crawl, walk, run method. So, you know, the crawl in this case was kind of convincing the people that you know, the enabling technology is really not something that needs to be feared. So there's an educational aspect to that. On the walk side, you know, after we'd learnt that the hard way, as we mentioned earlier in the call about the failure initially, you know, the walk piece is having the users kind of embrace that technology as a way to accomplish, you know, the existing work process, and that can include relatively minor improvements kind of out of the gate. And then the run, as I mentioned before, is when you start to receive the pull, and when those end users start coming back to the implementers, you know, with the ideas that had really not been discussed in the initial scope, and wanting to use the kind of the overall RFID solution for new things and beginning to ask those what-if questions. So, you know, I think at that point, you kind of in the realm of institutionalizing the solution, and in our experience, that's a great place to be in, because it's so much easier to deal with that when you have true pull from the business and they understand the value of what it is we're trying to do. So I think just on the cultural side, on the next slide, please, Stuart. You know, one real big part of this on the culture is that you know, we had, and I've always sort of said this, that, you know, innovations are only as good as the culture that are allowed to innovate within. And, you know, the executive management and leaders of the company are the ones that create the culture of the company, and the ones that, in many cases, in other industries, you know, you think about Steve Jobs as an example, or Sergey Brin or others, Ratan Tata, you know, these are the guys that are the heads of large, or were the heads of large companies that are known for innovation. So the great thing about this is that the guy that's on the left-hand side there, the guy furthest to the left on the left-hand picture is Reilly Bechtel. He was the guy that actually went out and saw this and believed in the solution. He was the one that mandated the use of this to help with some of the challenges that we've talked about. The guy on the right with the beard and the orange sun protector, he's the job site system coordinator and demonstrating the capabilities of RFID to the leadership of Bechtel. And so I think once you have the organizational belief in the innovation, you know, you can certainly achieve some great things, but without that, it's very, very difficult. And that organizational belief may not necessarily come from the CEO. It may well be the project director or the site manager, or as a kind of a microcosm of the bigger thing. But, you know, we're very lucky in Bechtel to have kind of an embedded culture of innovation and industry leadership and first of a kind, and kind of doing things differently. And I believe firmly that stems from the leadership of the organisation. So I think in some cases we were very lucky that we had that. And on the next slide, please, Stuart.
You want me to open all this animation?
Okay, so I'll stop short of giving exact numbers, because I'd sort of be, you know, I'd be a little bit improper if I was to tell you.
Oh.
Yeah, please, Stuart. Yeah.
Okay.
So, you know, I won't give a number. I'll kind of let you imagine this a little bit, but you know, we knew from the early pilot that we talked about in 2008 that we could kind of locate that, for those 20,000 RFID tags that we talked about, that we could, you know, probably locate the materials about 8 times faster than using the manual processes that we've seen today. And then in turn, our overall craft productivity could be increased by about 4 or 5%. So, you know, the estimated potential on Curtis Island of 5%, which is directly as a result of the labour improvements to the materials and productivity. So if you think about 5% on multiple billions of total install project costs, which are equivalent to lump sum contracts for Bechtel, then we're in very good shape in terms of proving the ROI. The construction effort's still going on. I don't know if you guys are following any of this in the industry press, but there's the AP LNG project, the GLNG project, and the QC LNG project. I believe it's the AP project that is getting close to first gas, so obviously construction is still continuing there. So the overall ROI numbers are still a little bit unknown. But when the dust settles on all of this and when the books close on those projects, I think what we'll be looking at is a very large total saving that gets realised when you consider that we're talking about these three multiple billion-dollar lump sum projects. So just on the next slide, Stuart, please. Okay, so I think just in sort of summary, this has been a massive success for us. It's kind of it's a unique environment. We talked about at the very start. The challenges on this project or across these three projects are not things that you would see on an everyday construction project. But that said, I think there's a combination of the fact that the overall cost of RFID technology is coming down and reaching palatable levels. I think we're in a very good position to be able to instantiate this on further projects, and I'll be very surprised if we don't see RFID become embedded as part of the overall materials management process, and that may well include kind of fabrication level. We may well find that RFID tags are attached at the fabrication points as a kind of a matter of course. So I think a lot of our future projects will certainly be heading that way. And another clip, Stuart, please.
Oh, thank you.
And so our goal across Bechtel is to make sure we're on the RFID boat when it leaves the port, and not to get left behind. I think we've picked a great partner with the guys at Atlas. We'll continue that relationship. And hopefully, you'll hear another success story from Bechtel in the not so distant future on RFID and materials management on another mega project.
Okay, thank you very much, Christian, for that. I'm just going to take us through to the questions. We are slightly over. If you just bear with me, we can do this in time if people are willing to stay on. If not, I'll understand. But the first question I've got is from Stephen Convens. What was the main driver for RFID on the LNG projects? What was the extract, push or motivation for RFID use? Was it the client, the PMC contractor, the individual EPC, the LSTK contract, value engineering, capex reduction, etc.? Christian, could you pull that one in?
Yeah, good question. So I would suggest that it's the efficiencies around the LSTK. Obviously, as I talked about a little bit earlier, LSTK projects typically will carry penalties from a schedule perspective. So given the complexities of the materials or the materials management process in general, the locations that you saw me describe, up to and including the fabrication facility in Turkey. Just literally not being able to afford any slippage in the construction phase due to poor materials management was something that was identified as a risk. And so I would say that above all else, it was an attempt to streamline the overall materials management program to protect the schedule. But obviously, that said, we've found some other interesting side benefits of doing this, including the safety things that I mentioned as well, and it's kind of that's been an added benefit. It wasn't the primary metric, but some of the things that we've been able to do on top of the original goals have been kind of interesting in and of themselves. So I would look at those as more soft. I don't really want to call safety soft, but if you follow what I'm saying, it's a hard dollar versus a soft dollar benefit. So I would say definitely it was to streamline the materials management process so that so that we could protect the schedule.
Okay, thanks for that, Christian. The next question I've got here is an anonymous one. At what point are you tagging materials with RFID tags? How are you going about this, and how has this impacted scalability of rolling out a solution like Atlas RFIDs? Can we ask Jeff to comment on that one, please, Jeff?
Yeah, thanks. I think the short answer to that is that it varies on the material type. So in the initial phase of implementation, we actually spent a lot of time tagging the materials at site. So for pipe spools, once the spools were received at site, the field crews would go out there and attach an RFID tag during the receiving process. Same with structural steel bundles, like you saw in Christian's presentation earlier. But as we, kind of moved through the adoption of the system, we actually began tagging the pipe spools at the supplier or the fabricator in Turkey. So I think that was part of the first slide that Christian presented on had a picture of in Turkey where the fabricator was, and I think that is kind of the mentality going forward, that as we track pipe spools for a specific project, that we will build that in, that it will be done at the fabricator.
Great. Okay. Thanks, Jeff. Next question we've got comes in from Dennis Bolt. When you reference a transfer unit, are you referencing to a spool or a flatbed with multiple spools? Christian, is that something that you could respond on?
Yeah, so the TU is essentially, the transfer unit is a flatbed that could carry any types of materials, but typically would carry multiple spools or steel bundles or whatever. So yeah, think of the sort of the two things are slightly different. So they're both RFID tagged, of course, the TU itself plus the materials that are on the TU. But in the case of the TU, just think of it as a flatbed vehicle that can carry multiple types of materials.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Next.
I'd like
sorry,
to add a little
Jeff,
bit more to that too, if that's all right. So in Jevix, we actually consider a transfer unit any aggregate of material. So that can be a trailer, it can be a flatbed, or excuse me, a flat rack, it can be a pallet, it can be a bundle of steel, it can be multiple things. That is any aggregate or collection of material. And the purpose of that is actually to be able to put together a transfer situation where you would have maybe a pallet with 4 motors on it that don't have RFID tags on them, a crate that has 2 pallets inside of it, and inside of it, on top of those pallets are valves, and be able to put all of that stuff aggregated all into this transfer unit, and as it moves through the internal logistics process, be able to update status, update location based on transfer unit movement, as opposed to only being able to do it based on material movement.
Okay.
It's a whole parent-child relationship.
Thanks, Jeff. Next question I got comes in from Kenneth Orr. Do you use the system for monitoring of operatives as well as materials? Christian?
Great question. Not on this project, but on other projects we do, namely the Wheatstone LNG project, which is on the west coast of Australia, which isn't an Atlas discussion. It's a different RFID provider, and that's largely because that was done at request of one of the client up there. We actually track the badges that the guys use for coming in and out of the site down what would have been the old brass alley are RFID enabled, and there are RFID readers at all sorts of different locations across the site, which helps to track where people are for various reasons, not up to and including some emergency situations. But then there's some geofencing that goes on top of that, which, if you're familiar with that, it's a way of what shall I say, creating zones, for want of a better description, within any given kind of coordinate, and then we can kind of figure out who was in and out of those zones. That again feeds into some of the questions around should people be there, have they got the required safety training to be in there, are they close to open trenches, or are they close to rigging operations, should they be there, should they not? So again, similarly, as we mentioned, one of the things that we found from the TU perspective, I'm purely talking about just the vehicle itself and not the explanation that Jeff gave, could help us to figure out where people are. It's a similar story on one of the other LNG projects, but we don't do it for time and material purposes. I think that's been talked about a lot just generally in the concept of wearable technology, but obviously there's a lot of things around labour regulations, union regulations and so on that would probably prevent that being done wholesale across the world. So So from a safety perspective and a kind of a mustering perspective, we do track people, but from a time and motion perspective, we don't.
I can just add something to that as well, if I may. There is a Fiatech project control, a project with Fiatech, which was access control. Now that was done with CCC. It's worth looking up on the Fiatech website because it did improve real-time tracking of site workforce and a few other bonus spin-offs as well. So worth having a look at. It's on the Fiatech website. Next question we've got here is where were the RFID tags added for pipe, instruments, equipment, steel piece marks, etc. And that comes in from Stephen Convens. Christian?
Jeff?
Oh, Jeff, beg your pardon? Go on.
It sounds similar to the other question, so maybe you can...
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess, is there clarification on that, or are we saying that where is the spool tagged or material tagged as in, where do we apply the tag, or is it...
I think it's where were they added, what location, this is the way I understand this question, if correctly, where were they added, at what point were they added? Is it pre-delivery to site, at delivery of site, where?
Yeah, I think that kind of goes back to the other question. For pipe spools now, it's being done at the fabricator pre-shipment. Once that spool is fabricated and painted, the RFID tag is applied just like the label would be. For the other materials, it's done at site once it's received or during the receiving process.
Okay, thank you for that. Concerning buy-in, this comes in from Harold Mosley. Concerning buy-in, have you got an interest on subsequent projects?
Yes, we have. The question about affordability and the challenge of institutionalizing it becomes almost on a project by project use case. This overall effort has won the RFID Journal Award recently, which was a good thing, obviously externally, but also a good thing internally, because there's nothing like an industry award to wake people up inside your own organisation. So yeah, we've got lots of interest. The good news is, and I think that maybe this is something I should have focused on a little bit more in the presentation, but the good thing is that the work that we've done now to enable this has already been done from the point of view of the integration from Atlas into our materials management procurement system. That very same system is used exclusively on every project, the procurement system on every Bechtel project around the world, where we include the procurement scope, irrespective of the construction scope and so on. So the good news is that it's one of those things that we've kind of done the hard work and proven it out. We've proven the technology, we've proven the work process. So it's just a case of whether other projects, essentially it comes down to whether they want to spend the money for the RFID tags, not to cut too much to the chase, but that's kind of what it comes down to.
Okay, thank you for that. In response to Eric Gatlin's question, yes, the recording will be made available. We will place it in the next couple of days in Reach. Next question again from Eric, I think it's a clarification. Where on the asset are the tags placed? That's something that's intrigued me in the past. I suppose it's over to you, Jeff. You're best able to answer that one.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that just depends on the material type itself, and even within material type, depending on the actual material itself. So, for instance, pipe spools, we typically find a place that's going to keep it somewhat protected. The tags are fairly durable, and some of even the new tags that we have available are even more durable. But trying to make it a conscious decision of the person putting the tag on the spool to put it in a place that's going to be protected, next to a flange or maybe next to a valve or keeping it off the ground, that sort of thing. With cable reels, it's actually, depending on whether it's a wooden cable reel or a steel cable reel, if it's wooden, it's drilled into the side, screwed into the side using wood screws. If it's on the steel cable reels, they typically have, I guess you'd call it kind of like a spoke on the inside. We've actually just zip tied the RFID tag to the spokes on the steel cable reels. For bundles of steel, they typically have bracing around them. We were attaching the RFID tags to the bracing there, which actually kept them fairly protected, but very well exposed to be able to be read fairly easily. With valves, actually just taking a zip tie and putting it through one end of the RFID tag, and then finding a handle or some other place on the valve that the zip tie could go around. It just depends on the material type, and that's actually one of the things that we do during training and implementation, is just understanding what materials we're going to be putting tags on. Where do they need to go to be protected and be read the best.
Brilliant. Okay. I think that answers the question. It certainly answers my question on the same subject. Well, thanks very much for the questions, for posing the questions, and guys, thanks for answering those. We're going to wrap up now. Just a couple of slides to finish off. The next meeting is, or the next community session is the 20th of August. I won't go through the dates there, but we regularly meet third Wednesday of each month, 9 a.m. US Central. Social media, thanks for those that have picked up on the various links and had a look at the videos that we've stored to date, gone through Facebook, Twitter and LinkedIn, and we'll see you all on the next one. Thank you very much. Bye for now.